Hey folks, what's up? It's Jamie from Books and Letters, and I have a review for you today. Today I'll be discussing Guardians of Dawn Zhara by S. Jae-Jones, a title that's compared to Sailor Moon and Cinder by Marissa Meyer. I might be jumping between outfits because editing Jamie saw some things that she wanted to adjust from previous filming Jamie, so if you see a jump cut, that's why. Before we get started in the review, and as much as possible, I will be keeping it spoiler-free, but I can't guarantee that because there are some plot twists that I saw coming that maybe you won't see coming, so I just want to make sure that you know that this is a mostly spoiler-free review, but also there are some content warnings that go along with reading this book. These are the content warnings that I saw while I was reading it, but your experiences with different elements might be different. I typically try to add my content warnings to the book trigger warning database, and I also search there for others that I might have missed, but because I read this before the book came out, it is an incomplete list and just based on my knowledge, understanding, and perception of the world. With that disclaimer of disclaimers out of the way, the content warnings for this book are animal death and animal cruelty, which is depicted on page in two separate instances that I can remember off the top of my head. There's also parental death, which is off-screen and is kind of the catalyst for the story, but also some on-screen for other people, not necessarily our main characters. There's also parental neglect and abuse that is depicted on the page, as well as body horror and body gore in general when there is some transmutation of people within the novel. There's also discussions around disability, which goes in line with some of the ableism that's within the book, not necessarily from our main characters, but from society as a whole. And alongside that, there is also homophobia and transphobia. In addition, there's discussions of war and things that have happened after a war, including murder, burning people alive, and other elements of capture and torture. There's also mistreatment of refugees and colorism that goes along with that. And I believe that's everything that I noticed within the novel, but if there's others that you did, please let me know in the comments below. And with all that out of the way, let's jump right into this review. Guardians of Dawn Zhara is by author S. Jae-Jones and was published by Wednesday Books, an imprint of St. Martin's Press, which is owned by Macmillan USA. It is about 400 pages, is labeled as young adult teen. The main protagonist is 16 years old. The main love interest is 17 years old. This is the first in a new magical girl transformation fantasy series by S. Jae-Jones, who's the author of the New York Times bestselling series Winter Song and Shadow Song. This story has dual perspective between Zhara and Han, Zhara being our magical girl transformation protagonist and Han being our himbo tuxedo mask, basically. Zhara has magical abilities, this we know, but magic is outlawed in the world that she lives in. There was a war, and at the end of that, all magicians were rounded up and executed, including her father, which means she now lives with her stepmother, the second wife, who knows that Zhara has magical abilities, because she hasn't told any of the people in power that Zhara has these magical abilities. So Zhara is treated basically as a slave in her own home. With that, she takes care of her sister, who is blind. In a quirky little meet cute and mix-up, Zhara and Han, who she thinks is just an ordinary boy, become intertwined. They then team up with Guardians of Dawn to understand what magic is and how to best protect the people that they love, especially since Zhara has this magical ability and Han's younger brother does as well. Inspired by East Asia in general, and you can read more about that in the author's note of the book, this has a lot of really amazing elements that tie together the stories of Cinderella and Sailor Moon to a new fantasy world that highlights what is the most important parts of those two stories and what S. Jae-Jones has created in her own world. As a too long didn't watch, basically what I thought is that it had a good portrayal of teenage characters, an inspiring fantasy world and magic system that I haven't seen too much of before, and also some elements that really paid tribute to the original Sailor Moon and Cinderella type stories. So let's get into my review in a little bit more detail. So first and foremost, I thought that there was a lot of good threads in the storyline. Things were introduced and brought back together to really give some element of nuance and understanding to the story. Some things were talked about in the beginning or in different contexts between Han's perspective and Zhara's perspective, that when they finally were able to talk to one another about those elements, it really made sense. It brought those two things together. And some of them I knew were the case when they were happening, but others I was surprised about. I think I'm pretty good at understanding plot twists. I read a lot of mystery novels, but some of these I didn't quite put two and two together, so it was really nice to see how they actually fell out in the story itself. There was also a lot of lore and world building in this, which makes sense. It's a 400-page book, but there was also some things that are yet to be explored. Because of the history that is there with the Just War, it really added that element of book burning, history burning, and really making sure that people didn't understand the elements of magic previously to now. There are missing texts, missing understanding, and some people are keepers of some knowledge and not others, and trying to piece those things together is a really important element to this story. And I was really glad that it wasn't just one person knows everything, tells somebody else about it, and now we have the solution to the problem. It was a lot of piecework and puzzle work for everybody to work together to understand what was happening and what needed to happen next. On top of that, I really liked the concept of the Guardians of the Dawn being a secret organization, loyalists in some areas, and just generally speaking, the name of these magical girls that are born every time that order and chaos are at the helms of one another. I thought there was a good explanation of what the different types of magic would be for those different Guardians of Dawn, and I'm glad that we got to see things roll out the way we did. I think the inclusion of this as a secret society that also had different elements of religion and magic and purpose to it really added elements to the story that you don't see a lot in these magical girl transformation type stories. Like, for example, Sailor Moon has the same type of lore over and over again as they reboot the series or expand on the series when they just add different crystals to what they can transform into. And I thought that Guardians of the Dawn Zhara did a really good job of explaining how different elements of magic were done in different ways. So for example, some people had to use brush strokes or write down their spells, but others could use that intrinsically. And when I was reading that, I thought of the example from Full Metal Alchemist, where some people have to use the alchemy circle, but Edwin doesn't have to, and that's because of the innate nature of understanding. We really see this a lot in Guardians of the Dawn Zhara, and I appreciated the understanding between the different ways that magicians work in the world. The story itself felt like a plot line that we've seen before, right? Magic girl meets mystery boy who happens to be a prince, and things ensue from there. There was a masquerade ball, a lot of discussion around our will we, won't we type aspects, an arranged marriage, all of the typical things that you see in a fantasy novel. And actually, I didn't feel like, oh man, I've read this before, because of all the different ways that not only were there inclusions of East Asian mythology and lore, but also just the inclusion of things intentionally from a diversity perspective. In the author's note, Jae-Jones is very explicit in using a gender-neutral aspect to the world. Not just because there is no third gender type word in either Korean or Chinese, but also because people should be able to introduce themselves. And I thought this was really well done throughout the entire book, where people were discussed as they, them, until they were able to introduce themselves, their pronouns, and their way of introducing themselves in their own identity, whether that was continuing to use they, them pronouns or picking up gendered pronouns such as she, her, or he, him. I also really appreciated the inclusion of different sexualities. As somebody who identifies as bisexual, it was really interesting to me to see how the inclusion of lesbians and the lesbian romance that I hope is forming was included in this book. Of course, there was some pushback in society, especially in comparison from the Southerners to the Northerners, and there was really that tension of, can I be accepted in a country and by people that I love? But that wasn't really the crux of the issue at hand. Most people were open and accepting, and that was kind of the side plot of family dynamics rather than society dynamics, so I really appreciated that. I always love found family stories, and this is butting into that. There is obviously some issues with Zhara's family, with the second wife and her stepsister, especially because the second wife knows that Zhara has these magical abilities and kind of holds that over her head. Zhara is proclaimed as dead to society, but everybody knows that she is still alive within her own village, and the second wife knows that she has magical abilities. So she kind of holds that over her to make sure that Zhara does all the housework, keeps them fed, feeling really indebted to her because it allows her to have that control, that power over Zhara so that she can make sure that her sister or her stepsister and the second wife's daughter is the one who takes the spotlight in the world. Of course, I really liked the sister dynamics. I did think at the end that there was a bit of a rush in the I forgive you, I can't trust you anymore, I forgive you again with the sisters. But I think that there is more to explore with that relationship as well as the other female relationships that are happening throughout the novel. I also really appreciated the way that everybody worked together. So there was obviously some hierarchical differences in who people were and how they were responding and relating to one another, especially the level of formality versus informality, which I appreciated being included. But I liked how everybody kind of got past that, talked about it, thought about how it really worked in their dynamic, and were able to become, that friend party group at the end. One of the things that really stood out to me in this was the struggle that Zhara has with accepting that her stepmother might house and feed her, but doesn't love or accept her. I think that's a struggle that a lot of people that are children of abuse or parental neglect really struggle with, because they see that roof over their head, the food that is on the table, as love and acceptance, when that's not necessarily the case. So I really appreciated her coming to terms with what she had seen and the rose-colored glasses she was using versus what the reality is. And it was really interesting to me who actually helped her see that, because typically you don't see that type of relationship between the protagonist and the other person develop into that way. I'm trying not to spoil things too much, at least about that twist. I liked that there was some elements of mentorship and training and teaching throughout this novel, and I'm excited to see how that continues to grow, especially with the magical girls as they start to learn about their own abilities and how they can work together moving forward. I think this series is going to be really interesting, and I'm hopeful that in the next book we actually go to a different perspective from another Guardian of the Dawn, so that we can start to see how the magical girls will end up working together, but also some of the struggles that each of them deals with. I think one of the best parts of Sailor Moon, and where I hope some of this inspiration is drawn from, is how each of the Sailor Scouts was able to have like their own story, their own arc, their own way of understanding who they were and how they fit in, and then came together as part of the group. It wasn't as though somebody went up and said, this is who you are and this is how you have to be. They were able to really explore that on their own. So I'm hopeful that some of the books in the series are able to do that for the other Guardians of the Dawn. And even if it's not a full book and just a novella or a short story, I will read all of it. I am so into this series already, and it's only been one book in one day. While the ending was left open to have a sequel, because obviously this is the start to a new series, I did think that things wrapped up a little bit too quickly. There were some elements that were so easily changed over from how it was before to how it is going to be moving forward that it was almost like whiplash. And because Zhara slept through it all, we didn't actually get to see those changes in place, and probably won't get to see them in place because of the way that the story is moving in the future. So that was a little disappointing, but I think it would have been too much time at the end dragging on into the political elements of this novel that weren't really there before, that would have really taken away from the emotional ending, the big action sequence, and just trying to set up for the next novel. If you are looking for a new fantasy story that really empowers women to take chances, that has young love and a really nice meet cute, as well as those elements of inclusion that are really intentional, I think you'll really enjoy Guardians of Dawn Zhara by S. Jae-Jones, and I hope you pick it up. So yes, I rate this book 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved it, and I just can't wait for the next in the series. If you liked this review, or if you liked this book, leave me a comment down below, and I will see you in my next review. Bye!